Happy Industrial Water Week, Scaling Up Nation. Trace Blackmore here, your host for Scaling Up H2O and your host for your favorite podcast, Scaling Up H2O, during Industrial Water Week. It's my hope it's your favorite podcast any day of the year, but I know that this is party central for this entire week because we are celebrating what we do best, and that is industrial water treatment. Nation, yesterday we celebrated pre-treatment Monday. Today is Boiler Tuesdays. Now, if you want to put on your calendar, on Wednesdays, we're celebrating cooling. And then on Thursday is wastewater, and then careers on Friday. And I'm asking everybody out there in the Scaling Up Nation to take your device out, take your phone out, and get a picture of yourself in front of your favorite boiler today and hashtag that to Industrial Water Week or hashtag IWW24. Nation, one of my favorite hashtag stories comes from a friend of mine, and they had an intern, and they had to write down, the intern that is, had to write down the pounds of biocide that left their facility, and the abbreviation was the pound sign. So anyway, they did this for an entire semester. And then at the very end of their internship, they were called in for an exit interview. And they asked, did everything make sense? Was there anything we can do better? How was your experience? And they replied back, I had a great time, but I do have a question. Why are we hashtagging all these numbers? Why does anybody care? So they weren't hashtagging numbers. They were writing down the pounds of biocide that was leaving their facility. And I just think that that's funny. That shows when generations get together, hijinks ensue. And Nation, we have a member of every single generation working within industrial water treatment. And I think that is just amazing. I think of all the things that I have learned from people that are almost no longer in this industry because they're retiring, or people that have retired from this industry. And I didn't get that information from textbooks. I did not get that information from going to class. I got that information because somebody decided to invest in me and told me about their experiences. So Nation, I have to tell you, boilers above all, and we are celebrating boilers today on Tuesday. I have received so much information with water treaters that came before me and things that they have taught me that I use today, that I still try to pass on today. So a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that you are talking with people in the generation above yours and asking them questions that they have the knowledge about. And if we don't get it, we're going to lose it. And I'm going to give you an example of one. I remember I was working with a gentleman. I was relatively new to water treatment. And in this case, it was not my dad. It was somebody else. And we were wondering why this boiler was underperforming. We were getting certain spots of wet steam. And if you ever wonder why wet steam is so bad, it's because steam on its worst day has 1,150 BTUs to use as work, where water on its best day has 180 BTUs. Well, that's a huge difference. And if you're getting wet steam, that plant is not going to have enough BTUs to operate whatever it is operating. And we couldn't figure out. Sometimes we got it, sometimes we didn't. And we just weren't getting the efficiency that we thought. And he goes, I think there might be oil in this boiler. Now, when you looked at the sight glass, it was hard to see because of the meniscus. And the meniscus is that downward shape dip that water creates when it's in a column. and that's because of surface tension. So we couldn't really tell with that. So he drew out a sample and he had it looked like a piece of bubble gum, but it was actually camphor. And it was wrapped up in his test kit. And he took his pocket knife out. He whittled off just a little piece of camphor and it just sat on there. And he said, "See right there, Trace? That's our proof." Well, I had no idea what he was seeing because I didn't see it. And he said, "Go get me a sample right out of the tap over there in the sink." And he put a little camphor in that sample and it started dancing around like crazy. And he said, "That is showing that there's nothing between the water and the camphor, and it should dance around like crazy." The fact that it's not dancing around means that there is an oil barrier blocking the camphor from touching the water. And we actually cleaned the boiler. We went ahead and scheduled to get that offline. We put a degreasing agent in there. And I can't remember how the oil got in the boiler. I want to say it was a relatively newer boiler and it wasn't cleaned properly, but I honestly don't remember that part of the story. I do remember that we cleaned it and we didn't have a problem ever since. And he proved definitively to that customer that there was an issue. Here's what I think the issue is. Here's what I'm going to use to prove to you that my hypothesis is correct. And here is my solve, and here is my bill for solving your problem. And that customer gladly paid it. And that was a day that I started carrying camphor in my test kit. So, how many of you knew that? That might be a trick that you're using already. That was a trick that I have never read anywhere. That was a trick that I learned from somebody that chose to invest that knowledge in me. So I have an ask on both sides of that fence. If you have years and years and years of experience, please don't keep that knowledge to yourself. Find somebody that you can mentor. I promise that will be one of the best experiences that you have had throughout your career. And you are making this industry better, and you are making sure that your knowledge is staying part of this industry, making it better one water treater at a time. Now, on the other side of the fence, if you do not have a mentor, then you need to go find one. Think of who in your company you can go ask for them to help you, for you to shadow with them. Can I carry your test kit for a day? Whatever you have to do, folks, you cannot replace knowledge like that. And folks, you can't read about knowledge like that. So make sure both sides of the fence are doing their part. And what a great time to think about that as we celebrate Industrial Water Week. Now, speaking of Industrial Water Week, I want to thank everybody that did hashtag Industrial Water Week and hashtag IWW24 in front of their favorite piece of pre-treatment equipment yesterday. That is so cool when all of us here in the Scaling Up Nation get to see how large the Scaling Up Nation is. We get to celebrate each other being in this fantastic industry. And of course, we've got an opportunity each and every day this week for you to do that. And today is all about boilers. So make sure you find your favorite boiler, your favorite piece of boiler equipment, get a picture of you right in front of that and hashtag that to Industrial Water Week or IWW24. Folks, I remember I was at a training seminar and somebody asked the question, what is the difference between a water tube boiler and a fire tube boiler? Now, you've heard that old adage, there's no such thing as a dumb question. And to many of us out there, you might be thinking right off the bat, that is a dumb question. Well, folks, it wasn't, because that wasn't a water treater that was asking me that question. That was a water treater's customer that came to that training seminar, and they had no idea what type of boiler that they owned. And they were coming to that water treatment seminar to try to learn more about water treatment because they were not getting that information from their water treater. And that was what that question was really about. Now, of course, we know that water tube boilers have water recirculating through the tubes, and the heat is external. And those are normally the higher efficiency, higher pressure, higher temperature, all those things. The larger of the boilers are typically water tube boilers. And then, depending on the design of the tubes that are inside there, they're either a D type, an A type, or an O type. And I'm not going to go too much into that because there is a ton of information if you want to research on that. And then a fire tube is used more for our commercial, industrial use. They're normally a little bit smaller, they're a little easier to maintain, and they are of a simpler design because the fire is in the inside of the tubes and the water is on the outside of the tubes. Well, you can only imagine we don't want scale on any boiler, but if it happens on the inside of a water tube, we have a lot less water volume to overcome that. On a fire tube boiler, it's a little bit more forgiving. Not that we want to forgive scale, but it is more forgiving because of the design. But the whole point of us as industrial water treaters is to make sure that that boiler, those heat transfer surfaces, are as clean as possible because our job is to efficiently transfer the heat through those tubes so we can create steam using as little fuel as possible. We do that because the surfaces are clean. Now, surfaces might be scale if we're talking about the water side. They might be soot if we are talking about the fire side. Both are definitely important. And I don't want you to ever think if something is outside of our water zone, it does not involve us. Here's how I like to think of us being industrial water treaters. We are equipment whisperers. Now, we treat water, but essentially we're treating the effect of water on that equipment. And folks, I will say hands down, we normally understand the equipment we are working on better than the people that own it, better than the mechanics that are actually trying to fix it when it comes to the transfer of heat. Our job is heat transfer efficiency management. And if there is anything on a heat transfer surface, it is not allowing us to be efficient. And in a boiler system, every piece of equipment is working together for the transfer of that heat. And that's how I want you to think about the system. Is it efficient on every surface? How do you know? How do you prove it? And then how do you have a conversation that proves your hypothesis about what's going on? Doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You could be proving everything's going right. But how do you have that conversation with your customer? Because that original, and I'm using air quotes, you cannot see it, dumb question that was asked was not a dumb question at all. That question was by somebody that's not in our industry. And what's the difference between a water tube and a fire tube? They didn't know what they had because their water treater didn't take time to talk about their equipment with them. Their water treater did not take time to let them know the great job, hopefully they were doing a great job, that they were doing for that customer. And these are all the ways that we can prove that. Mr. Customer, how are you making the wares in this facility with this boiler? How does the steam actually go throughout your plant? How are you checking your steam traps? Are you having any issues? So many times, water treaters are in a rush to get all of their accounts serviced. They take out the people aspect. And that's what that question was telling me. It had nothing to do with what a water tube was, what a fire tube was. It was, what should my water treater be telling me about my equipment? So I hope you learn from that, I'm doing air quotes again, dumb question. So you are making sure your customer understands the value that you give to them each and every day. Well, Nation, I hope you know we celebrate Industrial Water Week the first full week of every October. And if you want to learn more about Industrial Water Week, you can go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to our resources page, and then select Industrial Water Week resources. You will find everything Industrial Water Week. You will find past episodes, and you will find everything that our friend James McDonald shared with us about Industrial Water Week. And hopefully you can celebrate Industrial Water Week in style. Now, Nation, a lot of people celebrate on Friday by closing the week out, which is Careers Friday, with a water cake. Now, I said water cake, and I didn't mean to set up for this, but there actually is a water cake. It's rumored to be George Washington's favorite dessert, and it had no perishable ingredients in it, which means anything that tastes good, it doesn't go in this cake. And a lot of people are using that cake as an initiation rites when new people come on. A lot of people make that cake every Friday for Careers Friday during Industrial Water Week. And then there are people out there that just go to their favorite bakery and say, hey, do you have one of those devices where you can put a picture of this boiler on this cake? This is going to be our Friday cake. And they say yes, and you eat it, and it tastes good. I'm of that camp, but you can have whatever cake you want. Just make sure that you are celebrating with us this entire week. And of course, this entire week, we're inviting some friends to help celebrate with us. So here's one right now.
Happy Boiler Tuesday, Scaling Up Nation. This is Fred Schertz with Precision Chemical, division of Brown Labs. My funny story about a boiler is this. Once came upon a customer and he said, Fred, your competitor, they provide a great pocket knife. Man, this is the best pocket knife. You can find it anywhere. But I don't like crawling underneath this boiler for a week in the hot of the summer, digging out all the scale that's in the bottom of it. With you, I don't have that. They can keep their pocket knife.
Well, Fred, thanks for coming on and sharing that story. And I would agree, a clean boiler beats swag any day. And I've actually got a swag story myself. I've heard that swag stands for stuff we all get. I don't know if that's really what it stands for, but that's the stuff that companies hand out. And I was doing a boiler inspection, and this was actually on a fire tube boiler. And I was in the lower handhole, and I was actually raking out something that was in there. And it was a tape measure with the previous water treater's logo on it. So it had been there for an entire year. It actually didn't look in that bad of shape, and I gave it to the customer. And the boiler was pretty clean, other than the tape measure that was in the bottom. Now, I did not get the accolades that Fred shared on his story, but the boiler was clean. I guess we all knew it. We didn't have to say it. Scale Up Nation, my friend, your friend, James McDonald, each and every Industrial Water Week, we air his detective noir stories, Detective H2O. And a few years ago, he asked if I would be one of the voice characters for his learning series, Detective H2O. Of course, I accepted, and he keeps coming back and asking for more. So I have been trying to perfect my accents. I don't think I do a great job. I'm a podcast host. I don't need to do accents, but I'm going to try my best for you. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the premiere of The Case of Being Picture Perfect.
Welcome to Detective H2O, the case of being picture perfect. The pouring rain pounded against the office windows of Herbert Henry Oxidane, P.I., CWT. This put the water detective in a good mood. Nothing beat a steady rain on a weekday. Of course, nothing beat a steady rain on the weekends as well, in Detective H2O's well-formed opinion. As he stood there pondering what he was going to do for lunch, his phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He finally answered. Detective H2O here, the best water treater this side of Ohio, solving water problems drop by drop. What you got?
Detective H2O, this is Peter Fleming over at Thinking Boxes Incorporated. I need you over here now,
Came the insistent sound of desperation. I sense your urgency. What exactly is going on?
We are going through our yearly shutdown, you see. When we opened up our boilers, they looked terrible. Scale everywhere. What are you doing to our boilers? You're ruining them.
Okay, I'll be right over, Peter, and we'll get to the bottom of this. Let me grab my files, and we'll see if my old jalopy of a blue Ford will make it without much complaining. Can I pick you up lunch on my way over?
Good and yes. That's the least you can do for me after what I saw in those boilers, I tell you.
Detective H2O grabbed his paper files from the Thinking Boxes Incorporated account, thumbed to a section, and smiled. Then he headed to the door. Knocking first, Detective H2O headed into Peter's office without waiting for a response. Here's your lunch. I got your regular. Francine, the waitress, says to say hello.
Thanks, Detective. I appreciate the lunch. I've been craving it since we got off the phone. Sorry to call you in a moment's notice, but these boilers look terrible. Just plain terrible.
I believe you, and we'll get to the bottom of it, I promise. Let's finish the lunch first, and then we'll take a look. The water detective and Peter Fleming made their way to the boiler room at the back of the plant. Both fire tube boilers were open for maintenance and inspection. First impressions were the fire side looked good, but the customer's concern was on the other side of the metal on the water side, though.
Come over here, Detective, and look in this handhole. Here, take this flashlight. Look at all the scale on those tubes. That can't be good. I don't remember it looking like that last year.
I see what you mean. Yes, there is scale on those tubes.
Climb up this ladder and take a look in the manhole up top. It looks even worse from up here.
Detective H2O diligently followed instructions, climbed the ladder, and peered inside the boiler. Yes, I see what you're talking about. Scale on those tubes too. Scale in a boiler can have many detrimental effects, not the least of which is increased fuel usage. With the cost of fuel nowadays, that's not an easy pill to swallow.
I know. How did this happen? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to make me whole with this?
The water detective climbed down off the boiler and ladder, looked Peter square in the eyes, and replied, Let's take a look at last year's inspection report right after I first took over your account. I'm sure it has pictures for comparison. Detective H2O walked over to the water softener's covered brine tank, laid his account file on top, opened it up, and thumbed through it a bit until he found the last boiler inspection report conducted a year ago almost exactly. Ah, here it is. Let's see what song this canary sings.
Oh, good.
As the water detective reviewed the report page by page and inspected the pictures, he could be heard murmuring, Aha! Yes! And, I see. Peter tried to peer over his shoulder, but being a man of shorter stature, he soon gave up. When Detective H2O finally finished with the report and turned to face his perturbed customer, Peter asked,
Well, what did you find?
It's quite interesting, actually. Come here beside me, and I'll show you. Peter shuffled up beside the water detective as the inspection report was flipped back to its first page of pictures. Detective H2O began. Take a look at these pictures of the tubes from the handhold we just looked into. What's interesting is that as badly scaled as the tubes look today, I believe I would say they actually look better than they did a year ago. What would you say?
Huh. I see what you mean. The scale was pretty regular back then, but it's coming off in sections now.
Yes, which ironically makes it sort of look worse even though one could say it's better.
That's true.
And let's look at the comments and recommendations to remember what we discussed a year ago, said the water detective as he flipped to another section of the report. We talked about a couple of things, I see. First, the report covers the cause of the scale. Your water softener was not consistently producing soft water. A little further investigation showed the city water quality had changed significantly due to a change in water source. The incoming water was much harder, which meant the previous set point for the water softener was much too high. The water softener was producing hard water well before the end of its service run. Judging by the level of scale, this had been happening for quite a while undetected by your previous water treatment provider.
You're jarring my memory now, Detective H2O. I tossed them clowns out on the ear. Their name was Dudley, Charlie, and Howard Incorporated, but they should have been called Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe,
said Peter, clearly entertaining himself. The water detective continued. Second, we talked about acid cleaning the boilers to remove the scale and improve efficiencies to conserve fuel. Peter looked at the water detective and replied,
I remember that, but our budget was strained thinner than my mother-in-law's yoga pants. I just couldn't fork over the cabbage at the time.
That's when the decision was made to correct the water softener set point and turn up the polymer levels a bit to see how they would clean up on their own, with hopes the budget would allow acid cleaning this year if still needed.
You're right, Detective. Looking at these boilers, I'd say our plan is working.
I would agree, Peter. But let's talk about that acid cleaning of the boiler again. It's obviously still needed. How's the budget looking this year? As the report mentioned last year, the savings in boiler fuel would probably more than cover the expense.
Thankfully, the budget is looking a little bit better. Let's talk in my office.
Sure thing.
And Detective H2O?
Yes?
Thank you.
For what?
For not making me feel like an idiot. When I called you all up in arms saying the sky was falling, don't think I didn't notice how gently you took me from a raving lunatic to a partner in crime.
You're anything but an idiot, Peter.
I've been called worse, but you're a class act, Detective. A real class act.
In the underbelly and penthouses of the metropolis of Waterville, where the boilers percolate and cooling towers fog, there is one man who works tirelessly to end corrosion, stop scale, fight low-life microbes, and conserve water. That man is Detective H2O, best water treater this side of the Ohio, solving water problems drop by drop.
Scout Up Nation, I can't tell you how much I enjoy doing those. And James McDonald is so creative on how he helps teach industrial water treaters. So, James, thank you for that experience. Nation, I hope you have a great rest of your Boiler Tuesday. And join me tomorrow as we will be celebrating Cooling Wednesday.